Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing, and to you, Mr. Nathan, thank you for being here and for the work you're doing every day. I share Senator Graham's sentiments about not limiting where we invest to just those countries that are designated by the World Bank, because there are places that both need investment and have strategic interests for the United States. One of those areas, I would argue, is the Western Balkans, which I have been focused on for a number of years, and one of the places where I think we should consider opening a DFC office somewhere in the region because of its significance, both for a Europe that we want to see whole, free, and at peace, but also because it is an area that is ripe for interference by both the Russians and the Chinese. And one of the examples that I have here is from Montenegro, which signed a nearly $1 billion Belt and Road deal with the China Road and Bridge Corporation, with funding from the Export-Import Bank of China, to build a road that would have connected the north and south of the country. Now, you can see the current status of the project in red. That's where the project is completed, but the blue parts highlight the still incomplete sections of the project, and I think this is a poster example of what you were talking about in your opening statement about the limits of the PRC's investments. I mean, sadly, despite the fact that this project has not gone forward as it was supposed to, Montenegro has now signed yet another infrastructure deal with China. That happened in March when the government signed a deal worth $59 million with a PRC consortium to build a new road. But it's my understanding that there were no US or European firms who submitted bids. So can you talk about why that would have happened, that there were no other viable offers from the US, and what lessons we should take from this kind of situation?
Thank you, Senator. Well, I don't know the specifics of why the tender in Montenegro failed. I think I can generalize to the kind of situations that I see in many of the countries where DFC operates. You know, we focus on the private sector, so the projects that we fund need to be commercially viable, need to offer an opportunity for a return from the sponsors, where we would provide debt financing or potentially make an equity investment. And I think what frequently happens in these government projects that are then tendered is there's an opportunity, and I don't know in this particular case, but in general, there's an opportunity for corruption, for projects that don't really fit the needs. What happens when Chinese firms come in is frequently they use their own workers. They end up burdening the country at the sovereign level with debt that's difficult to manage. We're avoiding that by focusing on the private sector and viable projects. And I heard yesterday about a South American country where Huawei had built the 911 emergency call system that needs to be rebooted every 4 hours. And so it goes offline for an hour. All the manuals are in Chinese, and the country can't use it. So they're launching a new tender. I'm hopeful that American companies will step in, that companies from allied countries and our partners will also step in order to provide these services. But it's true, particularly when I'm in Africa, one of the things that you rarely see are US companies that are there to compete. And that, I think, is a broader issue, but one I would love to see EPC contractors, the firms that build infrastructure, be more broadly representative of America and Europe.
I agree, and one of the things we've got to do is to remind those countries that are looking for investments the trap that the PRC can create for them, as they did for Montenegro. Last year, the DFC announced a deal to provide up to $300 million in financing to the 3Cs Investment Fund, which is supposed to invest in transportation, energy, digital infrastructure in Central and Eastern Europe. It's my understanding that despite the strong bipartisan support for this investment, that negotiations have still not been finalized. Can you give us an update on where those are and when you expect them to be completed?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I was delighted last year, I think it was in June, to lead the U.S. delegation to the 3 Cs Initiative Summit. The 3 Cs Initiative is incredibly important in terms of strengthening our partners and allies in Central Europe. It's about economic connectivity, something that I'm a strong believer in. At that conference, we announced that we would be making a commitment to the fund. We're already working with the fund and throughout the region to find investments that we can make directly. We're in the final stages of negotiation with the fund manager for that fund. There are still some sticking points in the negotiation that are important from our side in terms of protecting the taxpayer interests in how the fund is structured. But I'm hopeful that we can get that fund across the finish line in short order. The bigger picture is this is a region where we're actively looking for projects. The European Energy Security and Diversification Act authorizes us to focus on energy infrastructure, and we have some very good projects in the pipeline and have already made a few in the region.
That's good to hear. One of the other areas, I chair the European Affairs Subcommittee of Foreign Relations, and so that's where I have been mostly focused. And one of the other areas I know that is ripe for investment is telecommunications, and we hear particularly from Eastern European countries about their interest in getting investment to help them so that they're not reliant on China or other countries for telecommunications. Is the DFC currently involved in any telecommunications projects in Eastern Europe?
So in the high-income countries of Eastern Europe, which is the vast majority of them, we're not currently authorized to work on telecommunication investments.
I actually have legislation that I introduced in 22 that would authorize the DFC to invest in those kind of telecommunications projects because they are so critical. So hopefully we will revisit that legislation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.